Needing to change out the CV shafts on your 95-96 S10 Blazers? Stay tuned. First, jack it up and then put it on securely on some jack stands. Shake your vehicle, make sure it's not going to fall off or anything. Double check it before you start climbing underneath it or getting underneath anything that could fall on you. In order to change the CV shaft, you're going to have to take off this big nut right here. It's a 36mm, and if you don't have an impact gun, then what I would highly recommend is, if you have somebody that can hold the brakes, you might be able to break it free, or you could put a bar, wedge one in the studs there against the ground and break it free. But I would recommend just leaving, before you lift it up, take the center cap out of the wheel and run through the wheel, and with it sitting on the ground with the emergency brake on and the wheels chalk, break the nut loose free and then just unratchet it. You can see right there those bolts. I think there's 7 or 8 bolts around in the diameter. You have to remove those bolts to get the CV shaft loose, or that's part of it, but you have to get those loose. Now with somebody on the brake, it's going to turn on you. In order to get those bolts free on that CV shaft, it might be good to have somebody hold the brake, or use a bar and wedge it in with the studs and against the ground and lock it. But because without an impact gun, you're going to have to turn it by hand, and they're just going to want to rotate, that the shaft will turn on you. So you got to have it locked, somebody holding the brake, and break all those free and get them all out. And maybe leave 2 in there until you're ready to get all the outside stuff, all the spindle and everything loose. To get this to release, you can just kind of pull it towards the rotor. What you're doing is you're compressing the piston in, and that lets the pads just slide right off. And I'm just going to go ahead and take the pads off because they're going to flop around. You can set it down easy for now. You can either you can buy the hooks to hold these. I don't even think I have one, because I found that the hooks never can find a place to hook it to. It's out of the way. So with wire, I can kind of generally just find me something to tie onto and then hang it where I want to. Okay, the next step is to take the spindle loose so that we can a lot of cars you can just take the lower ball joint loose and lift it and it pulls enough, but this is so long you have to take both the upper and lower ball joints loose to get the spindle to pull away to get the shaft out. We're just gonna, I don't think you need to actually see this, I'm just going to take that cotter pin out, and that's right there is a 3/4, and unscrew it. This down here, same thing. Take the cotter pin out, unscrew it at 7/8. I take the upper ball joint loose. I'm going to show you how you just bang on the side and pop it loose. They do make a ball joint separator tool, but the bad thing about that is it can always get into the rubber boot and tear it. So I never use them if I don't have to. I mean, there's been times I've had to, but okay, the CV shaft needs to be driven out of it. either use a brass hammer, put you a block of wood in between this, or put the nut back on it. Do not beat on this shaft unless you're just going to plan on throwing it away, unless you're replacing the shaft too. Do not beat on this shaft with a regular metal hammer. It should just release. Now we got, in order to get the shaft out, there's no way to push it back. We're going to have to get this down here on the spindle to get it to drop off the lower ball joint. Now you will notice in this video here that the hub bearing is off. You do not have to remove the hub bearing in order to change the CV shaft out. The only reason why I did was because I'm also changing the hub bearings, because actually this hub bearing on this side was bad, but the owner wanted to go ahead and change the CV shafts and the ABS brake sensors all at once while I was tearing all this apart. So if you want to see how to replace the hub bearings, be sure to watch my other video for that. Although, to be honest with you, if you are changing the CV shafts, it only takes 3 bolts once you get all this stuff tore apart where you can get to them. And it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and take it off and test them by hand to make sure that they're good. If they've got 100,000 miles on them, they probably need to be changed. But just make note that you do not have to take the hub bearings off in order to change the CV shafts, because once you set the spindle off, you'll want to wire it up or set it on something so that the ABS wire, if you have ABS, isn't pulled or stretched or broke. So be careful with that when you set this off. Now if you've done what I said in the beginning, take all your 15mm bolts loose on the inner joint where it ties to the differential. So you've already taken those loose with the ratchet. You're ready just to take them loose, take the 2 remaining ones out and pull it out. In my case, I'm going to use an impact gun, so and a length of extension. I'm going to have to move this caliper out of the way, put it over to that side, and then we'll have to take the shock loose because it will not come out without the shock being free. Pulling the shock loose, it would be a good idea to take, you can either use your floor jack, a bottle jack, or some type of a jack to come up under that control arm and pick it up just a little bit. That way when you you can get the bolt out of the shock a lot easier. Again, it doesn't matter, ratchet or impact gun, as long as you have something to be able to get it loose with. This sway bar bushing kind of gets in the way of the sock a little bit, but not too bad. I'm going to tell you though, folks, when working on suspension and stuff like this, you want an impact gun. You want something electric or cordless or air. You want some type of impact gun. It makes life a million times easier. And if I get any comments about me breathing hard, I'm going to tell you I got my 2nd COVID shot today, and I feel like, or actually yesterday, and I feel like crap today. But no matter, it's got to get done. Now I'm going to release the bottle jack and let the control arm come on down, and that'll give me some wiggle room for both the shock and getting the shaft out. Right out. Okay, now reverse order. We'll lay the shaft in there. We're going to use the jack and raise the control arm up a little bit and then hook up the shock. Then we're going to connect the inner CV shaft bolts. Put a dab of red thread locker on the threads. You have to put a lot. And I think I said that when I was taking it apart like 7 or 8 bolts, it's only 6. I didn't even count. I've worked on many of them where there's odd numbers and even numbers, and I couldn't remember. Go ahead and hook up your bottom ball joint. You don't have to tighten it, just put the nut on it. That's as done as I thought. Now I'm gonna put a bar on this thing and see if I can pull it down. If not, I'll have to go jack the other side to counterbalance what I'm doing. Be sure to have your nut on hand so that when you do get it through, if you get it pushed through, you can anytime that you have to pull the brake caliper off for whatever, I mean, if you're doing brakes, if you just got to pull it off or something, whatever, always go back and put some caliper grease. On this style caliper, you definitely need caliper grease on it. All you need to do is just take your Q-tip, get your little either squeeze tube or bottle of, I keep a bottle because I do so many brakes, but just put your little caliper grease in there. And that doesn't hurt if you got enough miles on it to go ahead and put a new hardware kit, which means new guide pins and new O-rings that go on these things. You want to clean your little bushings up that go in here. Make sure they still fit in the slide. Those fit good. Clean your caliper bolt guide pins up. If you don't have a wire brush, just use something like 220 or 320 sandpaper to kind of run over them, or if you got some emery cloth. Inspect your threads where they do screw into, make sure they don't look like they're boogered up or full of dirt. We need to go ahead and compress the piston in a little bit so we can slide it over the rotor. It does not require to be pushed all the way in, just backed off enough a little bit where you can slide the brake pads over top of the rotor. You can use a big pair of channel locks and squeeze it just a little bit, or if you have one of these caliper compression tools, and they make them different kind of ways too, make them ratcheting. It's just the most common. I'm going to use the outside pad, and I'm going to turn it where the pads are pushed against the piston a little bit. That way I'm not wanting to push on the actual pad itself that runs on the rotor with this. So. And it shouldn't take a lot of force unless there's something wrong with the piston. And like I said, we're only moving it just, 1/16 to, well, probably about 1/8 of an inch. This is how you put a cotter pin on. Once you've slid it through the hole and the big end is actually up into the notch, you put the long end facing downward. You bend it and then pull it back on the underside of the whatever the bolt or whatever or ball joint threads, whatever you're putting the cotter pin in, and then just push up on the other end. The reason why you do this, it makes it 1,000,000 times easier to get it off if you got to take it back off. I've seen people wrap these things around like a wire or bend both of them upward and twist them and stuff, and then you can't get the thing out. If you do it like this, they'll come out when you need to take them out. Otherwise, and they're locked in good here. So this is the way you put a cotter pin in. And other than tightening this nut, and I'll put the foot-pound torque, I think it's like 240 or 280 foot-pounds. I'll have to look it up and I'll put that down in the description. Other than tightening this up and putting the cotter pin in it, that's how you put a hub bearing on. And that's how you change out a CV shaft. Okay, now notice I still have the caliper tied up with the mechanics wire, and you're seeing why the mechanics wire is so much easier than using a hook. Hook's too short. You may need to move that caliper around. You can't do it with the hook. You have to keep trying to rehook it or find a place. Mechanics wire, you can swing it wherever, shorten it, lengthen it, whatever you got to do to it. So the next step is put the rotor on. Ensure that your rotor's got no dirt on it. And here's a tip: when you're doing brakes, put the lug nuts on. If you don't have a screw that goes in there to hold it against the hub, then just put a couple of lug nuts on. That way it makes it easier to set the brake caliper on and set everything in place and tighten things up. And you don't have to tighten these down with a wrench or anything, just finger tight, and that keeps the rotor in place. Now we're going to put the pads on. I'll go ahead and take my mechanics wire off. And that brake hose is causing some problems, but there we go. Also inspect your threads on your caliper bolts to make sure they're not boogered or damaged, because if you tear these threads up, you may end up having to get an oversized caliper bolt or put in a helicoil. I'll put the description, I'll put down the link to the description to both if you want to put a helicoil in if yours is happening to be stripped, or an oversized caliper bolt. You may also notice that on your replacement shafts at the cotter pin hole, the cotter pin doesn't actually go in the slot of the bolt. I don't. You'd have to have 2 or 3 washers to make that happen. But I still put the cotter key in there anyways, because these don't self-tight like the old ones do, and the old ones don't fit on the new thread. So that's how you do the job. So in this video, you saw how I had to pull the upper ball joint and the lower ball joint loose so that I could drop the spindle down and make it loose. Of course, I already had the hub bearing off, and if you want to know how to do the R&R on the hub bearing, I do have a video for that, so just be sure to watch that. But I had to take the upper and lower ball joint loose in order to set the spindle off to get it away from the CV shaft, because it's so long you can't push it back any further to get it through it. So it just makes it easier to set the spindle away from it and slide it out that way. And then it's just 6 bolts, and you undo those, pull the shaft out. Of course, you have to pull the shock loose. So you remember, you got to pull the shock loose in order to get the shaft out of the hole. Leave the shock loose, put the shaft back in, reconnect the shock, put your 6 bolts back in. Be sure to use a red thread locker on them, tighten them down, and then just reverse assembly. So anyhow, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe, and always check back because I'm always working on something crazy. See you in the next one.